Los Angeles, the city of angels. But beneath the Hollywood glamour and palm tree paradise, there's a darkness that most people never see. And in 2008, Marvel Comics published one of the most violent, unflinching, and completely forgotten stories about hunting that darkness. This is the story of Fool Killer, White Angels. A 5-issue Max series where an artistic serial killer teams up with the Punisher to wage war against a white supremacist murder cult. And almost nobody knows it exists. The Fool Killer isn't a hero. Let's be clear about that from the start. Mike Trace is a vigilante who treats murder as performance art. He doesn't wear a costume or use gadgets. He uses whatever weapons are available. But his signature weapon is a sword cane, and he leaves a tarot card of the Fool at every crime scene with a handwritten question. Are you? Trace has his own twisted moral code. He only kills fools, people he deems to have wasted their lives, hurt others unnecessarily, or corrupted society. A corporate executive who dumps toxic waste in poor neighborhoods, Fool Killer murders him and leaves his body in a trash can filled with his own factory's pollution. A loan shark who preys on desperate families, dead, arranged in an ironic tabloid that tells the story of his crimes. This isn't superhero justice. This is art through murder, and Mike Trace is exceptionally good at it. The story of White Angels begins with a man named Darius Good. Darius just got out of Lompoc prison after serving his time. He turned his life around, got a white-collar job, stayed clean, worked hard to rebuild his life. He was proof that redemption was possible. 2 days after his release, Darius Good is found lynched. It barely makes the police blotter, just another dead ex-con in Los Angeles. The cops file it away and move on. But when Mike Trace hears the details, hears the whispers about who might be responsible, he knows he has to get involved. Because all signs point to an organization called the White Angels. The White Angels are a clandestine hate crime organization operating in Los Angeles. They're white supremacists, neo-Nazis who have perfected the art of staying under the radar while committing brutal murders. They target minorities, ex-convicts, anyone they deem impure or undesirable, and they're very, very good at not getting caught. They use coded language, meet in secret, and have connections that run deep into legitimate society, businessmen, lawyers, even law enforcement. The White Angels don't look like stereotypical skinheads or street gang members. They blend in. They're your neighbor, your coworker, the person sitting next to you on the bus. And that's what makes them so dangerous. Mike Trace begins his investigation the way he always does, methodically, artistically. He follows the breadcrumbs from Darius Good's murder, tracking down connections, interrogating people who might know something, and what he discovers is chilling. The White Angels aren't just killing people, they're doing it with ritual precision. They have a hierarchy, with leaders called brothers, Brother Sound, Brother Fury, and others. They have foot soldiers like Bootleg Jack and Vernon Donaldson, and they have a network that spans across Southern California. Trace infiltrates their world, getting close to their operations, learning their routines, and then he starts killing them. One by one, the members of the White Angels start disappearing, found dead in increasingly creative and horrifying ways. Each murder is a message. Each death is designed to expose the hypocrisy and hatred that drove these people. Trace doesn't just kill them, he makes statements out of their corpses, leaving their bodies in positions that force the world to see who they really were. But Trace isn't the only one hunting the White Angels. In issue number 2, Mike Trace crosses paths with the one vigilante whose legend exceeds even his own, the Punisher. Frank Castle has his own reasons for targeting the White Angels. In the Max continuity, the Punisher operates in a grounded, realistic world without most of Marvel's superheroes. He's an aging Vietnam veteran who wages a never-ending war on crime, and white supremacist terror organizations are exactly the kind of targets he lives to destroy. When Trace and Castle first meet, it's not friendly. Both men are predators operating in the same hunting ground, and neither trusts the other. There's even a brief confrontation where they size each other up, testing boundaries, trying to figure out if the other is a threat or a potential asset. The dynamic between Fool Killer and Punisher is fascinating. Castle is all business. Cold, efficient, brutal but straightforward. He kills criminals because they deserve to die, plain and simple. Trace, on the other hand, sees artistry in his work. He philosophizes about his kills, leaves elaborate calling cards, treats each murder as a performance piece. Castle finds Trace pretentious. Trace finds Castle boring. But they both want the same thing: to destroy the White Angels completely. So they form an uneasy alliance. Two of Marvel's most violent vigilantes team up to wage war on a hate organization. And what follows is some of the most brutal, uncompromising violence Marvel has ever published. The series doesn't pull its punches. Writer Greg Hurwitz, who would later become a New York Times best-selling thriller author with his Orphan X series, made the deliberate choice to show the White Angels as realistically dangerous and hateful as possible. The villains use racial slurs. They display hate symbols. They make jokes about their victims. The comic doesn't sanitize their ideology. It shows it in all its ugly reality. And then it shows Trace and Castle destroying them for it. The violence in this series is extreme, even by Max standards. Trace and Castle don't just shoot their enemies. They dismember them, torture them for information, leave them in pieces as warnings to others. Paul Azacita's work is raw and visceral, capturing every brutal detail without flinching. This isn't the stylized violence of mainstream comics. This is R-rated, uncompromising carnage that feels genuinely dangerous. You can feel the hatred radiating from both sides. The White Angels' racist fury and Trace and Castle's righteous rage. As Trace and Castle work their way up the White Angels' hierarchy, eliminating foot soldiers and mid-level members, they discover something disturbing. The organization is bigger than they thought. It has connections in government, in business, in the justice system itself. Some of the White Angels are wealthy, powerful men who fund the violence from the shadows while keeping their hands clean. The comic explores how hate organizations actually operate in the real world, not as isolated cells of obvious extremists, but as networks woven into legitimate society. It's a surprisingly nuanced examination of systemic racism and how violence gets justified through ideology. But the White Angels aren't going down without a fight. In issue number 4, just when Trace and Castle think they have the upper hand, a new player enters the game: Sickle Moon. Sickle Moon is described as 98 pounds of bad news, a diminutive assassin who uses a crescent-shaped sickle blade as his weapon of choice. He's been hired by the remaining White Angels leadership to eliminate both the Foot Killer and the Punisher, and he's good enough at his job to actually pose a serious threat. The introduction of Sickle Moon raises the stakes dramatically. Now Trace and Castle aren't just hunting, they're being hunted. The predators have become prey. The battle between these three killers is vicious. Sickle Moon is fast, ruthless, and completely amoral. He doesn't care about the White Angels' ideology. He's just getting paid. But that makes him no less dangerous. In fact, it makes him more unpredictable. There's a sequence where Sickle Moon ambushes Trace and Castle, and for the first time in the series, we see both vigilantes genuinely struggling. They're injured, bleeding, pushed to their limits. Sickle Moon nearly kills them both, but this is where the partnership between Trace and Castle solidifies. They start working together, not just out of convenience, but out of necessity. Castle's straightforward brutality combined with Trace's creative tactical thinking creates a deadly combination. They manage to survive Sickle Moon's initial assault, but they know he'll be back, and they know they need to finish their war with the White Angels before Sickle Moon finishes them. The final issues of this series escalate into an all-out war. Trace and Castle assault the White Angels' main stronghold, cutting through their remaining members with ruthless efficiency. The body count climbs into the dozens. Blood soaks every page. But the comic doesn't treat this violence as triumphant or cathartic. Instead, Hurwitz and Azacita show it as exhausting, ugly, necessary, but soul-destroying work. Castle has been doing this for decades. He's numb to it. But we see Trace starting to question his methods. starting to wonder if there's any point to his artistic murders when the world just keeps producing more fools. The climax involves a confrontation with the White Angels' top leadership, the men who orchestrated everything from their comfortable positions of power. These aren't street thugs or violent extremists. They're businessmen in suits, people who order death from boardrooms and golf courses. And Trace and Castle kill them anyway. There's a particularly brutal sequence where Castle interrogates one of the White Angels' leaders, a wealthy real estate developer who funded the organization's operations. The man tries to bargain, tries to claim he was just donating money, that he didn't know what it was being used for, that he's not really a racist, that he has black friends, that Castle shoots him mid-sentence. Because in the Max universe, there's no redemption for men like this. There's only justice delivered at the end of a gun. The series ends with the White Angels destroyed, their leadership dead, their organization dismantled, their survivors scattered to the wind. Darius Good's murder has been avenged 100 times over, but it's not a happy ending. Trace and Castle part ways without ceremony. There's no friendship, no mutual respect, just two killers walking in opposite directions back to their separate wars. Castle returns to his endless crusade against crime. Trace returns to his artistic murders, leaving tarot cards and philosophical questions at crime scenes. And Sickle Moon? He survives the series, disappearing into the shadows with promises to continue hunting the Fool Killer in future issues. But those future issues never came. Fool Killer White Angels was published from July 2008 to January 2009, and it sold poorly. Despite positive reviews from critics who appreciated its unflinching approach to difficult subject matter, the general comic-buying public wasn't interested. The series was too violent, too controversial, too uncomfortable. The planned continuation, where Sickle Moon would become Trace's recurring nemesis, was quietly canceled. Writer Greg Hurwitz moved on to other projects, eventually leaving comics entirely to focus on his thriller novels. Artist Paul Azaceta continued working in comics but never returned to the Fool Killer. The character of Mike Trace disappeared from Marvel Comics. He exists in limbo, too violent and dark for the main Marvel universe, but orphaned in the Max imprint that Marvel has largely abandoned. Today, Fool Killer White Angels is almost completely forgotten. You can still find the trade paperback if you search hard enough, but it's out of print and rarely discussed. Most Marvel fans have never heard of it. Even hardcore Punisher fans often don't know it exists. And that's a shame, because despite its extreme violence and controversial subject matter, Fool Killer White Angels is actually a well-crafted story. Greg Hurwitz's writing is sharp and intelligent, exploring difficult questions about vigilante justice, systemic racism, and the costs of fighting hate with violence. The comic asks uncomfortable questions. Can you defeat hate organizations by killing their members? Does violence solve anything, or does it just perpetuate cycles of revenge? What separates a hero from a serial killer if they both leave bodies in their wake? These aren't easy questions, and the comic doesn't provide easy answers. Instead, it presents Mike Trace and Frank Castle as deeply flawed men doing terrible things for arguably good reasons, and leaves it to the reader to decide if that justifies anything. Paul Azaceta's artwork perfectly captures the grimy, violent world of the story. His style is raw and realistic, with heavy shadows and visceral action sequences that make you feel every punch, every gunshot, every blade. It's not pretty, but it's not supposed to be. The series also deserves credit for its treatment of the White Angels as villains. In a lesser comic, they might have been cartoonish neo-Nazi stereotypes. Instead, Hurwitz portrays them as disturbingly realistic, showing how hate organizations actually function, how they recruit, how they justify their violence, and how they hide in plain sight. It's a brave choice that makes the comic far more impactful than it would have been otherwise. Fool Killer White Angels stands as one of the most violent, controversial, and forgotten comics Marvel ever published. It's a dark mirror held up to American society, showing the ugliness of racism and the equally ugly violence required to combat it. It's a team-up between two killers that explores the thin line between justice and murder. And it's a perfect example of what the Max imprint was supposed to be: mature, unflinching, willing to tackle subjects that mainstream superhero comics couldn't touch. The series asked, "Are you a fool?" And it left readers to answer that question for themselves. In the years since White Angels ended, both Fool Killer and Punisher have had other stories, other adventures. The Punisher went on to inspire Netflix's acclaimed series, where John Bernthal brought Frank Castle to life in a way heavily influenced by Garth Ennis's Max run. Fool Killer briefly returned in a 2016 series by Max Bemis, but it was much lighter in tone and didn't capture the same intensity. But Fool Killer White Angels remains unique. A 5-issue miniseries where a serial killer and the Punisher went to war against Nazis, leaving a trail of bodies and moral questions in their wake. It's too violent to ever be adapted. It's too controversial to ever be reprinted. It's too dark for modern Marvel's brand. And that's exactly why it deserves to be remembered.